Chapter 1. Hyde Park. Beginnings. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was born on January 30th, 1882, in a large house in Hyde Park, New York. The house stood on a hill above the wide Hudson River. From the windows, one could see the water shining in the sun, flowing calmly toward the sea. Behind the house stretched green fields, old trees, and quiet paths. It was a place of peace, far from the noise of the city. The house itself was big and strong. Its walls were white, its roof dark, its rooms filled with light. Inside, the halls smelled of wood and old books. Portraits of ancestors looked down from the walls, reminding Franklin that he came from a long line of Roosevelts. Servants moved quietly through the rooms, bringing warmth to the fireplaces and food to the table. For a child, the house felt like a world of its own, safe and unchanging. Franklin's early life was one of comfort. He was the only child of James and Sarah Roosevelt. Unlike many children, he did not grow up surrounded by brothers and sisters. Instead, his companions were his parents, his books, and the nature around him. This gave him both solitude and special attention. His days were not filled with the noise of many children, but with the quiet rhythm of family life. Outside, the Hudson River was Franklin's first great teacher. As a baby, he was carried down to its banks, where the water touched the stones with a soft sound. As he grew, he walked by its edge, holding his father's hand. The river changed with the seasons, sometimes wide and calm, sometimes frozen in winter, sometimes rushing with spring rain. Franklin learned to watch it, to respect it, and to love it. In the mornings, Franklin often played in the garden. He chased butterflies, picked flowers, and collected small stones. In the afternoons, he listened to stories told by his mother or father. At night, he fell asleep in a quiet room where the sound of the wind passed through the trees outside. It was a childhood of gentle rhythms, full of security. His mother, Sarah, watched over him with care. She chose his clothes, guided his lessons, and taught him manners. She believed a Roosevelt must always show dignity. She held him close, but also demanded discipline. She taught him to say please and thank you, to sit straight at the table, to treat others with respect. From her, Franklin learned that love could be both tender and firm. His father, James, was older, calm, and patient. He did not raise his voice or hurry his son. Instead, he showed Franklin the quiet pleasures of life: a walk in the woods, a ride in a carriage, an afternoon of fishing. He taught Franklin to notice the colors of the sky, the songs of birds, the steady rhythm of horses' hooves. From him, Franklin learned patience, gentleness, and the joy of simple moments. Franklin was a curious child. He loved to explore the corners of the house, the attic full of trunks, the stables where horses stamped their hooves, the orchards where apples grew heavy on the trees. Each place seemed to hide a secret, and Franklin wanted to know it all. His eyes were wide with wonder, his mind eager to learn. Though his life was quiet, it was not lonely. The servants often smiled at him, telling him little stories of their own lives. He sometimes played with the children of nearby families. Still, Franklin often preferred his own company. He could sit for hours looking at a picture book, or walking slowly under the tall trees, thinking his private thoughts. In winter, snow covered Hyde Park, turning the world white and silent. Franklin would run outside, leaving small footprints behind him, his cheeks red from the cold. In summer, the air was warm, and the Hudson shone like silver under the sun. He swam, he rowed small boats, he felt the freedom of water under his hands. These seasons shaped him, teaching him both quietness and strength. Looking back, Franklin's beginnings at Hyde Park gave him 3 gifts. The first was a sense of place, the deep connection to the river, the land, and the home that stood firm on its hill. The second was the love of his parents, one gentle and calm, the other strong and guiding. The third was curiosity, the endless desire to see, to learn, and to understand. He was still only a boy, innocent and untested, but within him seeds were already growing, seeds of patience, strength, and vision. One day, they would grow into the qualities of a leader. For now, Franklin was simply a child of Hyde Park, running through fields, listening to stories, and watching the great river flow. Chapter 2. A Mother's Care. If the house at Hyde Park was Franklin's castle, then his mother, Sarah Delano Roosevelt, was its queen. She watched over her only child with both tenderness and strictness. In those early years, her presence filled the rooms of the big house, guiding Franklin's every step. Sarah was tall and elegant. She dressed simply but with dignity, her dark hair neatly pinned, her posture always straight. She spoke in a clear, calm voice, never shouting, but always expecting to be obeyed. To Franklin, she was both comfort and authority. When she smiled, the world felt safe. When she frowned, the boy knew he must correct himself. From the moment Franklin woke in the morning, Sarah's influence was near. She chose his clothes, making sure he looked neat and proper. She taught him how to greet visitors politely, how to stand when elders entered the room, how to hold his spoon and fork at the table. "A Roosevelt must behave with grace," she often said. These lessons seemed small, but they gave Franklin habits that stayed with him all his life. But Sarah's care was not only about manners. She also taught her son values. She told him stories of honesty, reminding him that truth was more important than comfort. She explained kindness, urging him to notice the needs of others, even servants or strangers. She demanded discipline, asking him to finish his lessons before he played. Through her guidance, Franklin began to see life as more than pleasure. It was also duty. In the afternoons, Sarah often sat with Franklin in the library. The room smelled of leather and wood, the shelves lined with books. Sometimes she read aloud to him, tales of history, poetry, or the adventures of faraway lands. Other times, she watched as he read by himself, his small finger moving slowly under the words. She believed strongly in education and wanted her son to grow not only in knowledge, but also in imagination. Franklin was close to his mother. He often ran to her with his questions. Why does the river flow? Why do birds sing? Why must I say thank you? Sarah listened patiently, answering with care, guiding him to think. But her love was not soft indulgence. She was firm. If Franklin misbehaved, she corrected him. If he grew lazy, she pushed him. "My son must be strong," she said, "for one day he will carry great responsibility." Sometimes her care felt heavy. As Franklin grew, he noticed that his mother was always near, always watching. When he tried to make small choices for himself, she often decided for him. Which clothes to wear, which books to read, which friends to see. Sarah's opinion always stood first. Franklin obeyed, but inside he began to dream of more freedom. Yet he never rebelled loudly. His respect for his mother was too deep. Eleanor, his future wife, once said later that Sarah's influence shaped Franklin more than any school or teacher. It was true. She had planted in him the belief that he was special, chosen for a purpose. Her faith in him gave him confidence, even when he was shy. At the same time, her discipline gave him steadiness, the ability to face challenges without fear. In the evenings after dinner, Sarah sometimes walked with Franklin through the gardens. The air smelled of roses in summer, of fallen leaves in autumn. She would hold his hand and tell him stories of her own childhood in the Delano family, of the ships her father had sailed, of the lessons she had learned about courage and honor. Franklin listened, his eyes wide, his heart quietly filling with pride. To others, Sarah might have seemed controlling, perhaps even strict, but to Franklin, she was love itself, love that guided, love that demanded, love that prepared him for the future. Her voice, calm and steady, became the voice in his mind that would later remind him, in times of trial, stand tall, do your duty, serve with dignity. Looking back, Franklin's early years under his mother's care gave him more than good manners. They gave him a foundation of character. From Sarah, he learned respect, discipline, honesty, and confidence. These gifts would shape the boy of Hyde Park into the man the world would one day know. Chapter 3. A Father's Gentle Wisdom. If Franklin's mother, Sarah, gave him discipline and order, his father, James Roosevelt, gave him calmness and quiet joy. James was already an older man when Franklin was born. His hair was gray, his steps slower than those of young fathers. But his presence carried a steady warmth, like the Hudson River itself, gentle, deep, and enduring. James was not a man of loud speeches or quick tempers. He moved through life at an easy pace, preferring peace to conflict. In the mornings, he liked to sit with the newspaper by the fire, sipping coffee, while Franklin played on the floor beside him. Sometimes he looked up and smiled, saying only a few words, but those words stayed with Franklin. Patience, my boy. Patience will take you far. When the weather was kind, James often took Franklin outside. They walked slowly down the hill to the riverbank. The wide Hudson sparkled in the sunlight, and Franklin, holding his father's hand, listened as James pointed to the water. See how it flows, steady and strong? A river does not hurry, yet it always reaches the sea. Franklin nodded, his young mind quietly absorbing the lesson. James also loved the land. He showed Franklin the orchards, where apple trees grew heavy with fruit, and the stables, where horses stamped their hooves. He taught him how to care for animals gently, how to feed them without fear, how to notice their moods. Franklin learned that strength could be kind, that power did not need to be cruel. On carriage rides, Franklin sat close to his father, watching the horses pull them through the countryside. The wheels turned over dirt roads, the wind carried the smell of fields, and James spoke softly about the world. He explained the cycles of seasons, the importance of honesty, the value of treating workers with respect. For Franklin, these rides were more than outings. They were lessons in character. Unlike Sarah, James did not push Franklin with strict rules. Instead, he guided him with example. When servants made mistakes, James corrected them without anger. When neighbors visited, he welcomed them with quiet hospitality. Franklin saw this and understood. True dignity did not shout. It was calm, steady, and fair. Sometimes, James took Franklin fishing by the river. They would sit in silence, waiting for a tug on the line. Franklin, restless, often grew impatient. But James smiled and said, "Be still, my boy. Good things come when you wait." Slowly, Franklin learned to enjoy the silence, the ripples on the water, the quiet presence of his father beside him. In the evenings, James liked to read aloud. His voice was deep and steady, carrying the rhythm of stories and history. Franklin listened, his imagination wide. Afterward, James often asked, "What did you learn, son?" Franklin would answer with a shy smile, and James would nod, satisfied. These small talks planted seeds of curiosity and reflection. Though James was gentle, his health was not strong. He often tired easily and sometimes had to rest in his chair, his face pale. Franklin noticed this and worried, but James never complained. "Life is not about how strong the body is," he once told Franklin. "It is about how steady the spirit remains." Those words sank deep into the boy's heart. Franklin's bond with his father was quiet, but powerful. He admired his calm wisdom, his patience, his kindness. Years later, when Franklin himself faced illness and weakness, he would remember his father's example. He would remember that strength is not only in muscles, but in endurance, gentleness, and hope. Looking back, Franklin's father gave him gifts just as precious as his mother's. From Sarah, he received discipline and confidence. From James, he received calmness and compassion. Together, these influences shaped the foundation of his character. In the great house at Hyde Park, Franklin was still only a boy. Yet, under the steady gaze of his father, he learned that leadership was not only about command. It was about patience, kindness, and the ability to guide others without force. These lessons, given by a gentle father, would stay with Franklin all his life. Chapter 4. A World of Books and Nature. Franklin's world at Hyde Park was not only shaped by his parents' love, it was also filled with books and with the wonders of nature. These two worlds, one of words and ideas, the other of fields and rivers, became his twin teachers. In the mornings, Franklin often studied with tutors who came to the big house. They taught him reading, writing, arithmetic, and foreign languages. At first, the lessons felt long, but Franklin's curiosity carried him forward. His eyes lit up when he discovered a new word, or when he solved a problem after many tries. He was never the fastest student, but he was steady, careful, and eager to learn. The library at Hyde Park became his kingdom. Its shelves were tall and heavy with books bound in leather. The smell of paper and ink hung in the air. Franklin climbed small ladders to reach volumes of history, geography, and poetry. He opened the pages slowly, letting the words transport him to faraway places. Sometimes he imagined himself as a knight in armor, sometimes as a sailor crossing unknown seas. One of his favorite subjects was history. He loved to read about great leaders and great struggles. He studied the lives of presidents, generals, and kings. He learned that nations rise and fall, but courage and vision can change the course of events. Even as a boy, he whispered to himself, "Perhaps one day I, too, will serve." But Franklin did not live only in books. The wide grounds of Hyde Park called to him. After lessons, he often ran outside, his dog close behind. He collected birds' feathers and kept a notebook where he listed the species he saw. He pressed leaves between pages, noting their shapes and colors. His eyes grew sharp, learning to notice small details. The way ants carried crumbs, the way clouds drifted across the sky, the way the river reflected the light of the sun. Sometimes, Franklin carried a small magnifying glass. He studied insects crawling on the bark of trees or drops of water shining on grass. Nature became a classroom without walls, full of secrets waiting to be discovered. Unlike many boys who cared only for games, Franklin found joy in quiet observation. His father encouraged these interests. James walked with him along the river and pointed out fish jumping from the water, or birds flying overhead. "Look closely, Franklin," he said. "The world speaks to those who listen." Franklin remembered those words, and they became a habit: to observe, to listen, to learn. In winter, Franklin built birdhouses and left food for the small creatures that stayed through the snow. In spring, he planted seeds with the gardeners, watching them grow into flowers and vegetables. The cycle of seasons taught him patience and respect for life. Books and nature together gave Franklin balance. From books, he gained imagination, knowledge, and dreams of distant worlds. From nature, he gained calmness, observation, and respect for the present moment. The two combined to shape a boy who was both thoughtful and alive to wonder. Sometimes, when he grew tired of reading, Franklin would lie under a tree with a book resting on his chest. He listened to the wind in the branches and thought about the characters he had just read. Were they brave? Were they wise? Would he be like them one day? These questions filled his mind, making his inner world as rich as the land around him. By the time he was a teenager, Franklin had already read widely and explored deeply. His mind was full of stories, his notebooks full of observations. He was still shy with other children, but inside he carried a secret strength, the knowledge that he belonged to both the world of ideas and the world of nature. Looking back, Franklin's early life at Hyde Park gave him a special gift. He was not only the child of wealthy parents, he was also a child of books and of the river, of stories and of fields. These influences made him unique. They gave him both vision and patience, both dreams and roots. One day, the boy who collected feathers and read about kings would himself become a leader. But for now, he was simply Franklin, the boy who loved books, who loved the earth, and who listened carefully to the lessons each day brought. Chapter 5. First Tests of Character. For many years, Franklin's world at Hyde Park was safe and calm. He had the love of his parents, the comfort of books, and the beauty of nature. But sooner or later, every child must step out of the circle of home and meet others. For Franklin, this brought his first real tests of character. Franklin was shy by nature. When visitors came to the big house, he often hid behind his mother's skirts or sat quietly in a corner. His cousins, louder and bolder, ran across the lawns, shouting and laughing. Franklin watched them with wide eyes. He wanted to join, yet fear held him back. What if they laughed at me? What if I failed? One summer afternoon, a group of neighborhood children came to play. They brought a ball and began a game on the grass. Their voices rose with excitement. Franklin stood at the edge, his hands pressed together. His mother, Sarah, watched from the veranda. "Go on, Franklin," she said gently. "Join them. You must learn to stand among others." Franklin hesitated, then slowly stepped forward. At first, he stumbled, his throw weak, his movements awkward. Some boys giggled. His cheeks burned red, but he did not run away. Instead, he tried again. With each attempt, he grew steadier. By the end of the afternoon, though not the strongest player, he was part of the circle. That day, Franklin learned that courage was not the absence of fear. It was moving forward despite it. As he grew older, Franklin faced more of these moments. At small parties or family gatherings, he was expected to greet people, to shake hands, to make polite conversation. His mother reminded him, "Stand tall, Franklin. Speak clearly. Look them in the eye." At first, his voice was soft, his words uncertain. But with practice, he found that people listened when he spoke kindly and with patience. Franklin also discovered the power of listening. Unlike many children who shouted to be heard, Franklin often sat quietly, letting others speak. Adults noticed. They said, "This boy pays attention. He thinks before he answers." Though he was not loud, his presence was felt. There were times when he failed. Once, during a picnic, an older boy mocked him, calling him the quiet one. Franklin's face flushed, and he wanted to cry. But then he remembered his father's words, "Strength is not loudness. It is steadiness." He held back his tears, stood still, and let the insult pass. That moment gave him a secret strength. He realized he did not need to fight every battle with fists or anger. Sometimes dignity itself was victory. Sports also tested Franklin. At first, he was not strong. Running tired him quickly, and he often finished last in races. Yet he did not give up. Day after day, he practiced rowing, swimming, and riding. Slowly, his body grew more capable. He never became the fastest or the strongest, but he became steady. He learned that effort could make up for natural weakness. Eleanor, who would later become his wife, once said that Franklin's greatest gift was not brilliance, but perseverance. These early tests in childhood showed the beginning of that gift. Franklin did not shine immediately, but he kept going, step by step. By his teenage years, Franklin's shyness had softened. He could now stand among other boys, smile, and speak with calm confidence. He was still gentle, still quiet, but no longer afraid. The lonely child of Hyde Park had begun to open himself to the world. Looking back, these first tests of character may have seemed small. Games in the garden, conversations with visitors, struggles in sports. But they shaped him deeply. They taught him courage, patience, and the quiet power of persistence. One day, these same qualities would help him face storms far greater than childhood fears. For now, Franklin was still only a boy, learning step by step that true strength is not in being the loudest or the fastest, but in standing firm, trying again, and refusing to give up. Chapter 6. Trips to Europe. Franklin's world at Hyde Park was wide and rich, but his parents wanted him to see more. They believed travel was a teacher as important as books or tutors. And so, when Franklin was still a boy, they took him across the Atlantic Ocean to Europe. For a child who had known only the quiet of the Hudson River, these journeys opened a new universe. The voyage itself was an adventure. Franklin stood on the deck of the great steamship, the wind blowing through his hair, the sea stretching endlessly around him. The ship's horn sounded deep and low, and waves crashed against the sides. At night, the stars hung bright above the dark water, more than Franklin had ever seen at home. He gripped the railing and whispered, "The world is so big." When the ship finally reached Europe, Franklin's eyes widened at everything he saw. In Germany, tall castles rose on hills, their stone walls touched by clouds. In France, he walked under the shadow of cathedrals whose towers seemed to reach the sky. In England, he heard the sound of bells from ancient churches echoing across narrow streets. Everywhere there were crowds of people speaking languages he could not yet understand. At first, Franklin felt shy. The markets were loud, filled with strange smells and fast voices. He held his mother's hand tightly, afraid of being lost. But slowly, curiosity overcame fear. He listened to the songs of street musicians, tasted new foods, and watched soldiers march in uniforms different from those in America. Each day brought something new to see, something new to learn. His parents encouraged him to study the world around him. Sarah pointed to statues and paintings, explaining their stories. James showed him bridges, gardens, and famous buildings. Franklin listened, asked questions, and began to collect memories like treasures. He carried a notebook and sometimes tried to write down the foreign words he heard. Bonjour, danke, good day. Each word felt like a key opening a door into another culture. One of Franklin's favorite memories was walking through the Louvre in Paris. The halls were filled with paintings and sculptures. He stopped before a canvas larger than himself, showing battles, kings, and angels. His young eyes studied the colors and shapes. He whispered, "It feels alive." In that moment, Franklin understood that art could carry history, and history could speak through art. In London, Franklin saw the Houses of Parliament and the great clock tower of Big Ben. He listened to the deep sound of the bell and felt the weight of tradition. He imagined lawmakers inside, debating the future of a nation. Something stirred inside him. He thought, leaders can shape a country. Perhaps one day I will too. These travels gave Franklin more than knowledge of buildings and languages. They gave him a sense of history. He walked on stones where kings had once walked. He stood in churches that had stood for centuries. He realized that the world was larger than Hyde Park, larger than America itself. His own life was small compared to the long story of nations, yet he dreamed that one day he might add a line to that story. When the family returned to New York, Franklin carried Europe with him. He remembered the castles on the hills, the stained glass windows glowing with colored light, the voices of people speaking in tongues new to his ears. At night, lying in his bed at Hyde Park, he sometimes closed his eyes and heard again the bells of Paris or the waves against the ship. For Franklin, travel was more than movement across the sea. It was movement inside his heart. It gave him curiosity, confidence, and a vision of a wider world. These journeys planted seeds of leadership, teaching him that to serve his own nation, he must also understand others. Looking back, those early trips to Europe gave Franklin his first taste of the international stage. He was still a boy, but already the world was shaping him, whispering to him of future responsibilities. The quiet child of Hyde Park was beginning to grow into a young man who could imagine a destiny beyond his own shores. Chapter 7. Boarding School at Groton. By the time Franklin reached his teenage years, his quiet life at Hyde Park began to change. His parents decided it was time for him to leave the safety of home and enter a stricter world, boarding school. They chose Groton School in Massachusetts, a place known for discipline, hard study, and a spirit of service. For Franklin, the decision was both exciting and frightening. Until then, he had lived under the close care of his mother and the gentle presence of his father. At Groton, he would live among other boys, eat in large dining halls and sleep in dormitories far from home. The thought made his stomach tighten. Yet deep inside he knew this step was necessary. "I must grow," he whispered to himself on the train to Massachusetts. The first days at Groton were not easy. The headmaster, Endicott Peabody, was a tall man with sharp eyes and a serious voice. He spoke often about duty, faith, and service to others. His words struck Franklin. "The measure of a man is not what he gains, but what he gives." Franklin listened, nervous but inspired. The boys at Groton were different from the friends he had known at Hyde Park. They were louder, tougher, and not always polite. Some teased him for his quiet manner and fine clothes. In the dining hall, voices echoed as students joked and shouted across the tables. Franklin often sat silently, unsure when to speak. He felt like an outsider, a guest in a place that did not yet welcome him. Sports were an important part of life at Groton. Football, rowing, and baseball filled the afternoons. Franklin was not naturally strong or fast. During his first attempts, he stumbled and often missed the ball. Other boys laughed, and his face burned with shame. But instead of quitting, Franklin practiced. Day after day, he pushed himself. Slowly, he improved. He never became the star athlete, but he gained something more valuable: persistence. The classrooms, too, were demanding. Lessons moved quickly, teachers asked sharp questions, and boys competed to show their knowledge. Franklin was steady rather than brilliant. He read carefully, took notes, and tried his best. At times, he felt discouraged, but the headmaster reminded him, "Steady effort matters more than quick success." Those words stayed with Franklin all his life. Though Groton was strict, it also opened new doors for Franklin. The school placed great value on moral character. Students were expected to help one another, to think about the needs of society, and to prepare for a life of service. Franklin heard these lessons again and again. At first, they were just words, but slowly he began to imagine himself as a man who could serve not only his family, but his country. Letters from home gave him strength. His mother wrote often, encouraging him to stand tall and reminding him of his manners. His father's letters were shorter, but always gentle. "Be patient, Franklin. Learn from each day." These letters became treasures, carried in his pocket, read at night before sleep. As months passed, Franklin grew more confident. He began to make friends, to smile more easily, to speak up in class. He learned how to laugh at himself, how to listen without fear, how to endure teasing without anger. Slowly, the shy boy from Hyde Park became a young man who could hold his place among others. By the time he finished at Groton, Franklin had changed. He was still gentle, still thoughtful, but now stronger. He had learned discipline, perseverance, and the first taste of leadership. He had faced fear and loneliness, but he had not been broken. Instead, he carried new courage within him. Looking back, Groton was Franklin's first great test away from home. It taught him that comfort is not the path to growth. Challenge, hardship, and even failure can shape character. These lessons prepared him for the future, when far greater trials would come. Chapter 8. Dreams of the Future. By the time Franklin finished his years at Groton, he was no longer the small, shy boy who had once hidden behind his mother's skirts. He was taller now, more confident, and beginning to imagine what kind of man he might become. The strict days of study and discipline had shaped him, but inside His mind was turning toward the future. Often, Franklin thought of his cousin, Theodore Roosevelt, who had risen to become President of the United States. Newspapers carried stories of Theodore's energy, his bold speeches, his love of nature, his belief in progress and fairness. Franklin admired him deeply. Sometimes, alone in his room, he whispered, "If he can lead, perhaps one day I can too." At night, Franklin would sit by the window of his dormitory, looking at the stars above the Massachusetts sky. He remembered the Hudson River, the gentle voice of his father, the firm lessons of his mother. He thought of Europe, of castles and cathedrals, of voices speaking in many languages. Each memory seemed like a thread, weaving together to form a larger picture. He began to feel that his childhood had given him special gifts. The first gift was imagination. Because he had often been alone, reading books or wandering the fields, he had learned to create worlds in his mind. He could see beyond the walls of his room, beyond the hills of Hyde Park, beyond the ocean itself. Imagination gave him vision. The second gift was strength of spirit. His mother's constant belief in him, though sometimes heavy, had taught him confidence. She had planted in him the idea that he was meant for something important, that faith became a source of inner power. The third gift was courage. From the Hudson River, from the games where he was laughed at, from the challenges of Groton, he had learned not to give up. Courage, he saw, was not about being fearless. It was about standing firm even when you were afraid. These gifts were like seeds, small but alive. Franklin did not yet know what they would grow into, but he felt them inside him, pushing him toward something larger. Sometimes, during chapel at Groton, the headmaster spoke of service to others, to the community, to the nation. Franklin listened quietly, his eyes lowered, but the words sank deep. "The measure of a man is what he gives," the headmaster said again and again. Franklin carried that phrase with him, repeating it like a private prayer. As graduation approached, Franklin walked once more through the school grounds. The grass was green, the air fresh with spring. He looked at the younger boys running, shouting, stumbling as he once had. A small smile touched his lips. He knew he had grown. He knew the world beyond Groton was waiting. When he returned home to Hyde Park, his mother welcomed him with pride, his father with quiet joy. But Franklin himself felt different. The boy who had once collected feathers, who had once feared joining games, now carried within him the dream of a larger life. One evening, standing by the Hudson River, he let the wind blow against his face. He thought of Theodore in the White House, leading the nation with boldness. He thought of himself, not as he was, but as he might become. "One day," he whispered softly, "I will serve. I will make my mark." The river flowed steadily, carrying his reflection across its surface. To Franklin, it seemed like a symbol of his own journey, quiet, patient, always moving toward something greater. The gentle days of Hyde Park, the guidance of his parents, the tests of Groton, all these had prepared him. Ahead lay Harvard, law school, love, politics, war, and destiny. The boy from Hyde Park was becoming a young man ready to step onto the path of leadership. 15 frequently used words in this story. 1. Estate, a large piece of land, typically with a grand house. Example: he grew up on a vast estate in Hyde Park, insulated from the outside world by tutors and family affection. 2. Tutor, a private instructor teaching a student one-on-one. Example: Franklin's early learning was guided by a tutor in the library, where leather-bound books lined the walls. 3. Imagination, the ability to form pictures or ideas in your mind. Example: He stared at maps and castles, letting his imagination carry him across seas he had never sailed. 4. Shy, feeling nervous and uncomfortable around others. Example: He was too shy to speak at family gatherings, but he listened closely and learned from quiet observation. 5. Cathedral, a large, impressive church. Example: In Europe, he stood before a tall cathedral, its stained glass glowing in the afternoon light. 6. Boarding school, a school where students live on campus. Example: Leaving home for boarding school, Franklin felt the weight of being away from both parents for the first time. 7. Perseverance, determination to keep trying despite difficulties. Example: Even when sports made him the last to finish races, his perseverance sharpened his confidence. 8. Vision, a mental image of future possibilities. Example: At Groton, he began to shape a vision for serving others, inspired by leaders like Theodore Roosevelt. 9. Leadership, guidance or direction given to a group. Example: He often felt too young to lead at school, but his calm voice during class showed emerging leadership. 10. River, a large natural stream of water, nature's constant companion in his youth. Example: The Hudson River taught him patience. He watched its currents and learned strength from its flow. 11. Gentle, mild, kind, and soft in manner. Example: His father's gentle wisdom guided him more through example than words or rules. 12. Discipline, the ability to follow rules or maintain self-control. Example: His mother's insistence on good manners taught him discipline that later fortified his public life. 13. Curiosity, a strong desire to learn or know more. Example: His curiosity led him to press leaves and capture birds' feathers, filling notebooks with nature's treasure. 14. Confidence, a feeling of trust in oneself. Example: Through small successes, walking across a field, finishing a book, his confidence quietly grew. 15. Dream, a cherished ambition or ideal. Example: He held a dream of one day serving his country, whispering it to himself as he read about leaders and wars.